Okay, guys, we ended the last video looking at the effects of the American Revolution, and so it's quite appropriate that the next video you guys look at is the causes of the French Revolution, because there's definitely a causation right there. We ended the last video looking at this text that I highlighted in yellow, the 9 different translations of American Declaration printed in France. That was definitely significant, and just look at some of the language right here in the French Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, this document that really was in the early stages of the French Revolution. It says, men are born and remain free and equal in rights. And also this part, the principle of all sovereignty resides essentially in the nation. So definitely some ideas from the American Revolution that were being applied to the French Revolution now, except instead of the American Revolution was a secessionist war and that the colonies were breaking away from England. Here in France, it's a little different. You have a social revolution happening from within the country. So it is different in that, but the principles that both were founded on are essentially the same. And it's important to keep in mind the causes of the French Revolution, because this relates to a lot of the things we've talked about so far. You have this high government debt and a regressive tax system. So what a regressive tax system basically means is that some tax systems, like a progressive tax system, the more money you have, the more you get taxed. The regressive tax system is the opposite. So basically, it doesn't matter how much money anybody has. A poor person's going to get taxed exactly the same as a wealthy person. And so that doesn't really work. In a way, this was protecting the nobility in the first estate. And you have these social divisions going on. And I want you guys to think back to that in-person lesson that I taught over Louis XIV in Versailles, because this is definitely where this intensified and became a bigger gap between the third estate and the first and second estate, or the first and second estate being the clergy and the nobility. Because Louis XIV had invited all these nobles to come live with him at Versailles, and it was to keep them under control, but still, they were getting to live a luxurious lifestyle while you had some of the peasants in the third estate literally starving. And so this is, that's going to create a little bit of resentment when you have some people living in the lap of luxury with the king and other people who are struggling to put food on the table at night. And they're working the land and barely making ends meet. And it's also important to remember and keep in mind, which we talked about it a little bit when we talked about Louis XIV, but the way the Estates General worked. So France had all these conflicts going on, and Louis XVI, the King of France, at the time of the onset of the French Revolution, calls the Estates General together for the first time since 1615 in 1789. And the way the Estates General worked is all 3 estates, and the 3 estates being the first estate was the clergy, second estate was the nobility, and then the third estate was everybody else. The third estate was 97% of the country population. And the way that worked was that each estate got 1 vote. So basically, the clergy nobility could automatically outvote the third estate whenever the third estate, accounts for 97% of the French population. Don't you guys think that would cause a little bit of problems? Yeah, it definitely did. And you have this tennis court oath come out of the Estates General that year, and it's pictured right here, of all these members of the third estate get together at a tennis court at Versailles and say that they will not leave until they develop a new French constitution, a French constitution. And this was the beginning of the National Assembly, which would be an unrecognized legislative body until 2 years later, when it became the National Legislative Assembly, which we'll look at that in the next video. And then an event that you could consider part of the course of the French Revolution, but I'm going to consider a cause, is the storming of the Bastille, which the Bastille was an old prison in the vicinity of Paris that used to be a royal castle. And so all these members of the Third Estate getting together and storming this, even though the prison had literally nobody in it at the time. It's the symbolicness of this, of all these peasants and all these common people going forward to this former symbol of royal authority and just, storming it. And this is where the French Revolution really starts. This is where the revolutionary ideas begin to take hold. And we will look more at the course of this revolution in the next video.